Good afternoon or good morning. Hello, my name is Ted Hulsy. I'm Vice President of Marketing and your host for today's webinar event. Welcome to the eFolder Partner Chat Series. This webinar series brings together leading eFolder partners for business-oriented discussions. Today we are joined by Eric Rockwell, President and CEO of centrexIT. Eric and I will be discussing the key aspects of a successful managed security offering and what it means to be an MSSP and what you need to become one yourself. Before we go through today's agenda, let's go over a couple housekeeping items. So first of all, today's session is being recorded. The recorded version of today's webinar will be made available on eFolder's YouTube channel. We will also make copies of the slides available to those who registered for the event. With nearly 350 people registered for today's session, we've put all participants in listen-only mode. You can enjoy the audio portion of today's event either by streaming it on your computer or by dialing in over the phone. Questions are strongly encouraged throughout. We have planned a special Q&A section at the end of today's discussion, but you may submit them as we go along, and we will try to address your questions on the fly. Today's presentation follows a logical flow. First, we will introduce today's partner, Eric Rockwell. Then we will jump right into the discussion with Eric on the key ingredients you need to create a successful MSSP offering. And Eric will provide you with many of the details you need to actually design your own MSSP offering. And then finally, we'll finish up with your questions. But again, I want to encourage you, while Eric's talking, I will be monitoring the Q&A log, so please submit them as we go along. So let's introduce Eric more formally. So Eric Rockwell is an eFolder partner, and I've known you, Eric, for several years. Met you through HTG many years back, but thank you very much. You're a frequent public speaker and contributor to the IT community, and we appreciate that. Why don't you tell us a little bit about centrexIT?
Well, thanks, Ted. Ted, I think I've actually known you for almost 5 years now. Isn't that scary?
Well, take it away.
All right, well, I've got an MSP down here in California. We're based out of San Diego, and we only serve clients that are headquartered here in California, San Francisco, LA, San Diego, although we do have clients that have branch offices all over the country and some that have branch offices over in London. We've been in business for 14 years, 9 months, and well, almost 9 months, 8 months and 21 days. We turned 15 on July 1st, and as of this week, we're going to have 43 employees on our team. So we're growing fairly rapidly, but we're not growing for the sake of growth. We're growing to give our team members career advancement opportunities, and we need new clients and more clients in order to do that. We've been very vertically focused over the years on healthcare, biotech, and life sciences. That's about 65% of our client base, although we serve clients in all verticals, but predominantly it's more regulated verticals like, aside from healthcare, financial services, legal, defense contractors, other regulated professional services clients, but also non-regulated markets like construction that just require high precision and high quality IT. And they realized that we had a recipe to do that. Okay, well, great.
Great introduction of centrexIT, and I think it might be helpful a little bit to give some background on how this conversation today came together. Eric, you were nice enough to join us as a panelist for my HTG vendor peer group meeting that we hosted down in San Diego about a month ago. And invariably, the panel discussion turned to security. And you were sharing with all of the vendor folks gathered there what you're doing with building out your MSSP offering. So that really was the inspiration, just to give everybody the background. So we appreciate you sharing that, and then that really allowed us to kind of formalize today's discussion and share it with a larger audience. So thank you. But yeah, with that, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think what happened was we had to give our intros, and I was sitting on the panel with 2 other MSPs, and when I gave my intro, I made the mistake of mentioning that we were focused on building a next generation cybersecurity practice, a managed security offering tailored towards small businesses that had the same outcome that Fortune 500 companies want from a managed security offering, and that completely completely tanked the whole panel discussion with the rest of the HTG members, and we spent at least 45 minutes talking about it before somebody actually said, can we get back on track and ask our first question now?
Well, I affectionately call it hijacking the panel, but I think it was a reflection of the strong interest. I mean, you guys each of you have different sized businesses, and each have different kind of pain points when it comes to different pain points when it comes to how you address security for your clients. And so, I think we got a lot of different perspectives on the tables from different size MSPs, and obviously you run the largest organization and you've done the most homework, and you're on the cusp of launching this service offering into your market. So naturally, I think you had the most to share in terms of building a formalized offering around it, and that's why I thought it was going to just be a no-brainer having you as our guest for today. So with that, why don't we go to what we're calling the 10 key ingredients and kind of talk about those. And let's start out with the strategic planning process, and tell us a little bit what you mean by that and why that's kind of the foundation, one of the foundational ingredients.
Yeah. Well, what I found was that with managed security, it's very, very similar to the managed services model that we have for IT, and there's a lot of overlapping parallels. And just like with our managed services model, we do VCIO with all of our clients. We start that with strategic planning, and a strategic planning session with all the different stakeholders, department heads, executives. We interview all of them to make sure that we know what their requirements for IT actually are, and make sure that they can be acknowledged and have their voice heard. Well, we do the same thing with cybersecurity, because just like with the managed services practice, everything starts with strategic alignment. And if you're out of alignment with the business plan from day one, what you're going to end up delivering might have a good outcome or it might not, but it has a much lower chance of delivering the right outcome because it hasn't been custom tailored and aligned to the company's business plan. The same thing we do with VCIO, and it's the same thing that we're doing with vCISO, which is the Virtual Chief Information Security Officer. And part of our job is to take what a CISO would recommend and understand how to tailor it to meet the objectives of our client's business plan, so it's not too heavy, it's not too light, it doesn't inhibit productivity, it enhances it by lowering cybersecurity incidents and enabling everyone to get their jobs done instead of setting up roadblocks everywhere, which, by the way, is the approach that a lot of the enterprise MSSPs have taken with small businesses, and it just didn't work. We actually have a client that used to work with an MSSP, and it's a small client. They have 25 employees, and this MSSP, their model was tailored for the enterprise space. They literally had more VLANs than they had shared calendars and employees in the company. I mean, everything was on a different VLAN. There was like 1 or 2 domain controllers per VLAN. It was just way too heavy for a 25-person company.
And I mean, how long have you been doing this strategic planning process when you bring on new clients? And tell us a little bit about how you formulated that, because when I talk to a lot of MSPs, they say, well, we do onboarding of clients, or we might have to do some technology refresh when we bring on a new client, but it's very rare that anyone actually talks to me about strategic planning with new accounts, to be quite frank.
Sure. Well, I found that's a critical recipe for success. If we don't do that, we're immediately out of alignment with some people's expectations, because usually not every executive was involved in the sales process, maybe 1 or 2. But how are we going to actually meet everyone's expectations for being their virtual IT department if we haven't sat down and actually listened to them, especially with larger clients, the clients that we have that are between 1 and 500 employees? They're going to have multiple department heads, multiple executives, a real executive team with multiple C-level executives and system owners for all the different primary business applications. I mean, that can become a mess unless you have an approach that listens to everyone's expectations, acknowledges their concerns, gets them written down, and then creates alignment with the group so that everyone is aligned on where we're going together, and they don't feel like IT is not listening to them, because that encourages shadow IT, and that's when, you know, the manager of XYZ department says, IT can't do this, this isn't working, I'm just going to go ahead and go out and buy Dropbox and move all my stuff to Dropbox because that's a better solution for me. We don't want that. We want the opposite. We want everyone to be going, man, I love our IT team rocks, and I'm so glad that they're on our side and not our competitor's side. This is helping the business. So when we start with that strategic planning, I mean, that's what our VCIO does, and we have 3 different VCIOs. One of them is a real enterprise CIO who used to be the CIO of a 5,000 employee company, and the other 2 have been on our team for 5+ years. They have business degrees, they understand the technology, but they also understand the business side, and their specialty is aligning those 2 together, aligning the technology plan with the business plan. So that strategic planning process, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to mention that. Yeah, I just wanted to mention that it starts with interviewing all of the executives, stakeholders, and system owners, and usually department heads. We go through a standard set of strategic planning questions, find out what's working for them, how IT is working for them, and what's not working for them, and make sure that we uncover where all the data is. And usually we'll find 1 or 2 critical systems that the former IT didn't know about or the CEO didn't know about, and the data may or may not be being backed up. We take all that together, and when we have the first IT steering committee meeting with everybody in the group, we give that summary, and we gain alignment on what we heard from everyone. We show the draft of the strategic plan, which we call the business information plan. We then tailor that with everyone's involvement and input, and the CEO signs off on it, and now we know what we're going to be doing for the next year. And in the quarterly steering committee meeting, that's our quarterly CIO meeting, that's when we maintain and regain alignment with that business plan, that business information plan, and make sure that things haven't changed, and if they have, we make a quick tweak and a quick shift, and we regain alignment and keep going forward in the same direction together.
Now, the devil's always in the details, so the strategic planning process, is this a project that's built out on a time and materials basis at the upfront of an engagement? How does that work?
So we factor the cost of that actually into the monthly fee, and that plus other onboarding activities we spread out over the first year of the agreement. So usually, so instead of charging someone 10, 20, or 30K up front, we flatten that out, spread it across the first year, and they might pay an extra $500 or $1,000 a month for that first year, but they like that better than having a huge upfront cost.
Excellent, excellent. Okay, well, great. And I think maybe let's kind of move to the next topic, which I think is closely aligned. And can you talk about the security policy framework and standards?
Yeah. So what I've seen in the community is that a lot of companies approach it to manage security or cybersecurity is to take one thing they heard that's good, like 2-factor authentication. Oh, we need 2FA. We need to get 2FA. Let's implement 2FA. All right, we're good. Oh, we need antivirus. Do we have a firewall? All these different things are requirements that actually come out of an information security policy. And the way that large companies handle this is, instead of playing whack-a-mole and hearing a hot term like 2FA and trying to implement it, they draft an information security policy that's based on national or international cybersecurity standards like NIST 800 and ISO 27001. And that security policy, that framework, is where all this stuff gets written down, and requirements like having 2-factor authentication or single sign-on with one identity management solution, something like that gets written down in that information security policy. And then once that information security policy is approved by the C-level executives in the organization, IT rolls it out. We do a gap assessment. We figure out what the gap is between the current state and the state of requirements in the information security policy, and we draft a plan to get there. So it's very methodical, and we're not just making one-off changes because of a buzzword. We're marching towards a recognized standard together. And we don't have to reinvent the wheel. All this stuff is written down. Other big companies have already figured it out. All we have to do is tailor it down to small businesses. So we're not charging them $100,000 like a big consulting firm would to do a gap assessment and implement a security policy. We're making it affordable.
Okay, and I guess I don't hear that many other MSPs talking about these particular standards that frequently. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's partly because the traditional managed services model is more based around managing devices and specific systems and hardware, as opposed to being a virtual IT department. And if we look at ourselves as managed service providers as the virtual IT department for our clients' organizations, Fortune 500 companies or Fortune 1000 companies, they have a list of roles that have to be filled, like CIO or CISO, IT director, IT manager, and then you have all these specialists, network operations, so network admins, sysadmins, help desk people. You have all these different roles that would need to be filled. We look at it as let's create an approach that fills all these roles for our clients, and we're just slicing time so we know that one VCIO can handle X amount of revenue for Y amount of clients. One vCISO can do the same thing. One IT manager can do the same thing. Now we have a model that's based on being a virtual IT department where multiple organizations can benefit from having a larger team with more roles being filled without the price necessarily being higher. And I don't see a lot of MSPs who have taken that approach. But I can tell you from our rapid growth, I mean, we have more than 500K in MRR today. 6 months from now, we're going to have more than 600K in MRR. And I can tell you from our rapid growth that the market is responding really well to that approach.
Excellent, excellent. Let's move along and talk about thinking about the MSSP offering as something different and completely separate from the core MSP offering. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, if you look at the ingredients of an MSSP, you'll find a lot of overlap. There's a lot of stuff as MSPs that we already do. So by having an MSP also be the MSSP, there's immediate cost savings right there because we don't have to have two companies managing antivirus and firewall and content filtering and stuff like that. So that's a huge benefit that I see. But having said that, if we look at ourselves as an IT department, the vCISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, security engineers, security analysts, those roles are completely separate from everything else we do as an MSS or as an MSP or as a virtual IT department. So I realize we have to create a separate package and a separate product offering that fills the rest of those roles and give our clients the opportunity to choose if they want to have that higher level of security protection and pay for those additional employees or not.
Okay, and so
offering because it requires separate people that you wouldn't necessarily have in an MSP.
Got it. And it kind of back to modeling the outsourced flavor of this off of what a mid-enterprise or enterprise customer would look like. These security functions are going to be quite separate and distinct and have an entirely different mission than other parts of the IT department.
Exactly right. So even for our MSP clients, we're still modeling security standards based on NIST 800 and ISO 27001 requirements like the SANS 20 critical security controls. But we're giving them the option to formalize it. And what we found is a lot of the smaller clients, they'll choose not to do that, and sometimes they'll get lucky, sometimes they'll have an incident. But every time, or if there is an incident, that's another opportunity to revisit this and see if this is a better approach for security in their future.
Right, and I guess the corollary to that, though, is that you envision a business model here when you start rolling this out in earnest, where you'll have clients that might have their own IT department, but they'll adopt your MSSP offering as a standalone offering from your company.
You got it. This MSSP offering is going to be the first offering that we've ever had that stands alone from our MSP offering. We don't sell cloud or professional services outside of our managed clients. We will sell this outside of our managed clients. And by being the security experts, we're going to come in and do a gap assessment and in some cases find all these security gaps that IT really should have been managing better. And if they don't have the same level of operational maturity that we have, or their OML can't at least keep up with ours, there's a good chance that that MSP is going to get displaced by us. And the MSSP side of the house is going to start feeding the MSP side of the house, and vice versa.
Excellent, excellent. I love the strategy. Talk about what you've had to do, I guess, in terms of working with your vendors. I mean, it's a you know, the MSP market, it's all about multi-vendor solutions, and we spent a lot of time talking about this on that HTG panel about, you know, how the vendors themselves, we don't spend enough time building multi-vendor solutions, but thank goodness for companies like your own, because you're taking all of these different components and building them together.
Exactly right. And by getting the vendors to work together, it just creates a better outcome and experience for everybody in the community. And that's part of what we're doing. So I'll give you an example. SIM and SIEM those are tools that the enterprise has used for years, decades actually, and it's something that every enterprise MSSP does or uses. SIM is file integrity monitoring. SIEM is security information event monitoring, and those are log correlation, behavioral analysis systems, basically a way to listen to everything that's going on in the environment, create a baseline for what's normal, and learn from what's not normal so we're only responding to real threats. Those tools are very heavy and traditionally very expensive. A few years ago when I started embarking on this mission to build this for our clients, I couldn't get a SIEM tool for under 50 grand, and there was just no way that a $3 million company was going to spend 50 grand of their IT budget buying a SIEM tool, because that doesn't even include the labor for remediation and monitoring, number one. And number two, that's more than their MSP budget was for the entire year. So, I mean, there was just an immediate misalignment with the tools required to do this job and the pricing of those tools and getting it down to the small business level. So I'll give you an example on that. I'm trying to take the approach that Southwest Airlines took when they entered the airline market. I don't know if you know this, but their blue ocean strategy was not to compete with the airlines, but to compete with the bus lines. They identified that if they could get people from A to B just as fast as an airline for the cost of a bus ticket, most people would choose that option as opposed to taking the bus. And by doing that, they ignored a lot of the things that traditional airlines do, like have first class and have fancy lounges in airports and stuff like that, you know, meals on planes. They ignored that stuff and decided to focus on customer service, getting from point A to point B fast, things like that. And they just blew away not only the bus lines, but they started blowing away the airlines and really transformed the modern travel market. And that's what we want to do with this MSSP offering. We are not going after MSSP's clients. We are going to be offering something, really our competition is going to be other MSPs who don't do managed security. But I think by bringing this thing down to a price point that MSPs can afford, we're also going to start shaking things up in the traditional MSSP market and potentially start eating a lot of their lunch. So I went to, so going back to the SIM and SIEM example, I went to a number of vendors in that space, found one who was willing to play ball and enrolled in the mission of making their pricing model affordable to small businesses. And I got their commitment. I was able to sign a contract with them, and that was a huge part in getting this thing off the ground. Because if that critical tool isn't affordable, this whole thing isn't going to be affordable. And I took that same approach with the other vendors, and now a bunch of them are talking, even ConnectWise is involved, and we're working on building this thing up together so that it can benefit the entire MSP community as a whole, not just us.
Right. So it really, I mean, you know, kudos to you for, you know, really going deep with your vendor relationships and really pushing them to think through their pricing models and think through their packaging models and to make it accessible for advanced service providers like yourself to take this to a broader audience. and really solve the security challenges across more client segments. So that's great, and I think it's you know, to any vendors who might, I know I at least saw one ConnectWise employee on the call today. You know, to the vendors out there, you know, I think we all need to realize that just like centrexIT and Eric is innovating in terms of the models, we need to be creative in figuring out how to bring multi-vendor solutions to market and also bring pricing models to bear that really fit into, you know, a managed security framework in this example, and make it so that you can take out this great technology to even small business clients.
You got it.
Okay, so let's go to the next ingredient, which is data governance and control. So can you talk about how that kind of fits into the overall picture here?
Well, that really goes back to the strategic planning process and the security policy requirements. Having all that stuff written down in a single document, and by the way, a lot of that stuff ends up getting done in small businesses without being written down, so it's really hard to measure and manage. And that just goes back to getting that written down into that information security policy first before we start, so that we know what to measure against and we have something to be in compliance with.
Now,
and by the way, a lot of regulations, a lot of regulatory requirements inside of regulations like HIPAA are based on NIST 800.
Gotcha. And then what are some of the common scenarios you see where data is not being governed? You know, you do that strategic planning process, you find these gaps, you find these holes, you find these non-standard ways of governing corporate work content and intellectual property. What are some of the big aha moments that clients have, and then where do you take them from a solution perspective?
All right, Ted, you're going to owe me $20 for saying this, first of all. Second of all, I'll give you an example about one of our clients who is a defense contractor. They have to comply with a regulation called ITAR, which governs documents or data that contains information about anything they're selling to the government at a very high level. So that data cannot be touched by non-U.S. persons, and it can't leave the U.S. soil, and we have to be able to demonstrate that. So for that client and other clients like it, we wrote those ITAR requirements into their information security policy, and for them, we actually moved all of their ITAR regulated data into an anchor folder that lives on their file server, and we use the private cloud version of Anchor, so we're able to actually control all this stuff and demonstrate that the data was only in points A, B, and C ever, and when this person went outside of the country, they turned in their laptop. That's all written down in the information security policy as a requirement, and they took a loaner laptop outside of the U.S., their access to Anchor was cut off, and when they came back, they turned in their loaner, it was scrubbed, and they were actually given their company-issued system back. All that stuff gets written into the information security policy.
Excellent. Yeah. So I think it's, you know, whether it's Anchor or it's some other flavor of business grade file collaboration or file sync solution. I mean, I think it's just an important. I think it's a really good example of where you've got to think through in the strategic planning process all the different areas where there are massive compliance risks for certain clients and certain verticals, and then just in general, I mean, I think there's a lot of small businesses that with all the shadow IT stuff, there's been a lot of sloppy decision making being made about where data is housed and governed and controlled, and I just would encourage everyone to think that through as a part of you know, taking on helping clients with their security and privacy.
Yep.
So talk to us a little bit about, you know, business continuity. Just, you know, is things like backup and BDR, are those parts of your MSSP offering, or do they fit as kind of like Lego blocks with the MSP offering? How does that work?
Well, just like with the MSSP offering, that's a Lego block that gets added on, but we identify that requirement through the strategic planning process. A lot of prospects will say that they want that bundled in, and we'll say that's fine, but look, we may get this right, we may get this wrong. So what we recommend doing is in the beginning of the engagement with us, in the beginning of the MSP engagement, in that first strategic planning session, we'll help identify what those requirements should be. In the very beginning of the onboarding, day one, your virtual IT manager who does the onboarding, they're going to do an assessment on data integrity and make sure that all of the primary business application data that we've identified so far is being backed up and protected, and if it's not, we're going to SWAT it. But for the business continuity strategy, that's something that should come out of the strategic planning process, so we identify the right requirements and don't implement something that's only going to meet half of them or 80% of them, and then not comply with something from a regulation like HIPAA, for example, that we didn't know about. So we do that for both MSSP clients and MSP clients with the same type of approach. Strategic planning, we get that written down in an actual business continuity plan, which is a separate document than the information security policy, and we have the C-level exec sign off on it. And the virtual IP manager, the VITEM, does a quarterly assessment against the requirements that are written down in that document to ensure that they're actually being met, and they take screenshots as evidence that we were meeting those requirements on a specific date.
Right, and I think just the systematic approach you're describing here, whether this lives in an MSP offering or is a component of risk mitigation in an MSSP offering, I mean, it's just, if you approach it from, I think the important takeaway is we often get in these conversations with partners about how to sell BDR or how to sell backup, and the reality is you have to plan proper backups and proper business continuity into the overall solution, and this layer of defense is the last line of defense in many cases around the data for these businesses, and it really just, it has to be planned into the overall solution rather than something you have to sell and convince somebody of.
You got it.
This next topic, we kind of touched on it, but maybe talk to me a little bit about your pricing philosophy. We talked a little bit about multi-vendor solutions, about how you're being very creative and working with your vendors to make sure everything fits together. But maybe talk a little bit about the net result for the clients who will be purchasing your MSSP offering. What's your pricing philosophy going to be? And then in a couple of minutes here, we're going to get into some of the actual details of that.
Well, so number one, for affordability, I mean, it's kind of like when Henry Ford tried to make cars affordable to the general public. That's what we're trying to do with this security offering in small businesses. We don't want it to be a luxury item that only enterprise companies can afford. And what I did was, or what my team did, was we started asking clients in the CIO process about budgets for cybersecurity, and we came up with some common budgetary numbers that worked for most of our clients from 3 different sizes. And those are the numbers that I modeled the product around and got the vendors to compete with, basically, so that all the tools and our costs were in alignment with a margin expectation and still delivering a high-quality offering at a specific price point. And then number 2, I ended up meeting with a bunch of competitors, or having clients help meet with competitors, MSSPs, not MSPs, to find out what their offering costs and make sure that we had a similar approach. But I mean, in every example that I have, we were 3 times less expensive than any competitor for doing the same thing or more. So I'm going to give an example of that, but something that we come in and charge $2,500 a month for, the MSSPs were charging $7,500 a month for, or $8,000 a month for, and in some cases it wasn't even as complete. You had to spend 10 grand a month to get something that we were able to deliver for $2,500 a month at probably the same or better margins than they were making on it.
Okay, competition, look out. Talk to us a little bit about how user education is a critical component of the overall solution.
Well, that's actually a common regulatory requirement and something that gets written into an information security policy. We all know that the users are the #1 vulnerability in any environment, and we do ongoing cybersecurity testing, simulated attacks, with using third-party solutions, ongoing educational videos, and annual in-person security trainings to make it very real. And when we do those simulated cyber attacks, we'll do that before that annual in-person session. And with larger clients, it might be 5 or 6 sessions that get recorded. But we'll use those real attacks so we can make it relevant and say, guys, last month we launched a simulated cyber attack, and 50% of the organization gave the criminal your username and password to this network. And that just really opens people's eyes, and they go, wow, this is a real thing. We also record those, like I said, so that as new employees are hired, that's just a part of their onboarding process, and HR will make them watch the required cybersecurity training video from that year, and the content gets updated every year. So that user education approach is a critical layer in defense, just like firewall or FIM and SIEM is. Without that, we're only 80% effective. All these things have to be, all these cylinders have to be firing together to make this engine really move and pull the car effectively.
Now, that's awesome. You're creating custom, socially relevant, right? Because it's actually coming from unique organizations. Educational content. That's fantastic. And then you're recording it, repurposing it, baking it into the employee onboarding process. You know, we helped out today's conversation by providing some of the visual aids here. You know, there's a whole crop of kind of subscription-based security educational tools out there. I don't want to suggest you're necessarily endorsing Ningio. I've heard good things about them. I just wanted to use that as an example. But where might, you know, sourcing in you know, third-party content to propel the user education fit in?
Well, I'm happy sharing all of our ingredients. I don't consider that proprietary knowledge. In terms of, I mean, Ningio is good. KnowBe4 is really good. I think they have an excellent approach, and it's very cost effective. You know, we've been beating them up on price for years, and they're listening. But I mean, if anybody has any questions on that, I'd be happy to share our recipe, and everybody can try to negotiate the same numbers that we have and do the same thing that we're doing. It's just going to help the community if more people are asking for it.
Now, but I guess, Eric, back to what you're doing in your business, you're producing custom content and you're sourcing content from KnowBe4, it sounds like. How do those two things fit together in the recipe, if you will?
Well, that's part of it. So the vCISO and vCIO, part of their job is to learn from what happens in these simulated attacks, and instead of just doing canned training, tailor the training so that the organization, the people in the organization, understand how their behavior relates to regulatory requirements, security vulnerabilities, tactics the cyber criminals are using. That human approach, I think, is critical to creating a safer environment. Otherwise, you're just learning from stuff that works for 80 or 90% of the market, but you're missing that additional 10 or 20%. So we're trying to really close that gap as tight as we possibly can.
Okay, so that means that, you know, third-party content's only going to get you so far. If you really want to go to that deeper level with your specific clients, you need to start actually capturing the output of your pen testing and vulnerability assessments, and really bake that back into the education for the leadership and the rank and file employees of your clients.
Yeah, especially the simulated cyber attacks. I mean, I've found that clients respond. They take this so much more seriously when they still see real numbers and go, holy crap! I can't believe how many people fell for this. It's really a powerful enrollment tool.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's talk about kind of the two final topics, and then we'll get into some of the actual kind of product, services you're taking to market, the different frameworks there. But talk about the need for a security officer at the client, and talk to us a little bit about the right kind of clients that you're seeking for your offering.
Well, I think the right clients. I mean, any small business that houses critical data, either intellectual property, data that's regulated, this is just a natural fit for them. And I found a lot of small businesses in the community, healthcare practices, for example, law firms, they know they're regulated. Some are just ignoring the requirements because they think they're never going to get caught. Eventually, it's going to bite them in the. I mean, it's just a matter of time. Or they think that they're meeting the requirements, but they're somewhat naive. And when we actually go in there and take a look at the information security policy they've written down, we show them, look, this says you're doing X, Y, and Z. Are you doing that? No. Well, you're immediately out of compliance with your own policy. So anyone who understands that they have to comply with some of these regulations, or they just have data and intellectual property in the environment that cannot get out, or they don't want to be, they're tired of disruptions from common cyber attacks, those are all great clients. And I keep going back to those regulated verticals because that's the low-hanging fruit. Those are the easy ones. I think that over time, over the next 3 to 5 years, this is just going to be an expectation the entire market has. But right now, it's an expectation or something that's much easier to enroll the low-hanging fruit clients in.
And then talk to us a little bit about the need for a security officer at the client. I thought that was an interesting thing that came up in the panel discussion a couple weeks back.
Yeah, I mean, we're not saying that we're the only point of accountability for cybersecurity either. I mean, this is a partnership. This is something that we have to do together with our clients. So even though we have a VCIO and a vCISO, someone in their organization, one of their C-level executives, has to take accountability in this also. In fact, they're the highest point of accountability for this. And in the information security policy, we document the CEO, the COO, the CFO, someone as that organization security officer, and that's whose butt is on the line if, for example, they're regulated by HIPAA and there's a cyber breach and they're the ones who might have to sit in front of an inquiry or meet with an auditor. So there's shared accountability in this, and I found that helps with the enrollment, and it really helps the C-level executives take this seriously instead of just kind of ignoring it like they may have done in the past.
Okay, excellent. Well, let's see. In the interest of time, I want to remind everybody, please get your questions in. We're going to be getting to Q&A here, formal Q&A here in a moment. But Eric, why don't you talk to us about you know, some of the detail here on these slides?
Yeah, there's a nonprofit organization called the SANS 20 that I mean, they're just excellent. They have taken a lot of the NIST 800 requirements and built something called the SANS 20 critical security controls. And I have those CSCs documented here and ranked from severity, very high risk to the lowest risk. This is something, when we write an information security policy, we incorporate all 20 of these critical security controls into it. And this is something that anyone can do and anybody can learn from. SANS also has examples of how to meet these different requirements and examples of how to harden gear, like Cisco gear, to comply with these critical security controls. So it's an amazing wealth of knowledge. And this is our approach to managed security. We start by determining the organization's stance on cybersecurity. That's the strategic planning session and what goes into drafting the information security policy, which gets written and approved by the C-level executives in the organization, and the roles for security are clearly defined and written down, what we're accountable for, what they're accountable for. So we have that shared accountability. We determine what missing processes or SOPs are required to deliver this outcome. And tools, we already have a package that includes those SOPs and tools, so that goes hand in hand with our MSSP offering. We plan the initiative to implement these different processes and tools because that's not something that happens overnight. This can be a 3 to 6 month onboarding so that we don't disrupt their current business initiatives. And then it's just a matter of launching and executing and using the execution muscle we've built with professional services and other initiatives with our clients to get them from A to B to C and demonstrate that we have done it successfully and create an audit-ready report so that if and when they do get audited, we don't have to go through the entire network with a flashlight with the auditor. We just hand them their information security policy and a copy of the audit report, and that's all they look at.
Okay, so there's a question from Bob. The SANS 20 list, or the kind of the meat or the detail behind these 20 security controls, is that freely available from the SANS Institute, or is it something that you need to go pay to get? Can you tell us a little bit where to get that?
No, that's all free and available from SANS. Like I said, they're a great resource, and you can even download examples of how, let's say, CSC 17 would be written into an information security policy. And I don't recommend using all of their documents as templates. I do recommend learning from it and understanding how to tailor that to a specific client's needs. That's where the real value comes in. If you take all of the templates from SANS, all the SANS 20 CSC templates, and apply them to every one of your clients, they're immediately going to be out of compliance with their security policy. And the value that you bring to the table is understanding how to tailor them so that you're still meeting the requirement, yet you're not putting in something that's too heavy and never going to be met by a 25-person company.
All right. I think the next slide we're going to get into kind of how you're pricing and packaging these things.
Yeah, so just to give you an example of 3 packages that we have for SMBs, these are for companies that really range from 25 to 500 employees. And there are certain things that we sell one-off, like SSO and 2FA, because that's something that is a variable per user cost. But the other expenses in here we found are more per node or per site, and the formula works out better if we package them as up to 3 locations, up to X amount included or Y amount included. And as you can see, it kind of gets a little bit bigger as it steps up, because the enterprise plan is really written for those 200 to 500 employee organizations that are probably multi-site. And if it goes above, in this example, 5 locations, we can just add that line item a la carte to cover the rest of their locations. But these packages are all designed to deliver that security, incident response component, centralized services from our Security Operations Center, our SOC, the firewall management, the SIM and SIEM, the proactive stuff that we talked about earlier, the change control and incident response procedures that we've already written that they can leverage and benefit from by outsourcing this component to us, antivirus, anti-malware, cybersecurity defenses, things like anti-ransomware, crypto prevent, content filtering, all that stuff is included in all of these packages. And then as the packages step up, we include quarterly best practices assessments, the vulnerability scanning, the penetration testing. That might not be really required or necessary for that 25-person company, but it definitely is for companies that are more regulated. Same thing with the annual information security policy gap assessment. That might be a requirement for a larger organization or an organization that is heavily regulated, yet not something that would be required at the smaller level, even though it is a recommendation. So we're trying to give our clients options and come in at a price point, again, that is below any MSSP in the market and delivers the same outcome and experience that that Fortune 500 companies get without the misalignment between SMB and enterprise.
Excellent. Okay, and then let's talk a little bit about the one-time projects and how those fit in.
Yeah, these pricing examples are more for that larger organization, that 200 to 500 employee organization. And what we're doing right now is we're building out a more templated approach that requires less time and overhead, so that we want to get the cost of delivering an information security policy down to 10 grand for a small, 25 to 50 employee organization, and not have all the big heavy lifting and red tape that you might see in a 200 to 500 employee organization. But for that 200 to 500 employee organization, there's a one-time project cost. It's about 20 grand in this example for authoring a NIST 800 and ISO 27001 based information security policy and tailoring it specifically to the organization. There's a lot of time that goes into that. a lot of interviews, a lot of strategic planning, then rolling out that security policy, getting it approved. There's a lot of time that goes into that also. Getting signatures from everyone, assigning those security roles to everybody in the environment, or sorry, in the organization. And then the last piece is doing that gap assessment and remediation and saying, hey, we're going to have to do A, B, and C to get from where we're at today to compliance with the security policy, and then actually roll it out and create an audit-ready report after the gap remediation so that we can hand something to an auditor that has evidence and screenshots from testing plans showing that we're complying with all 20 of the SANS 20 critical security controls and the rest of the requirements in NIST 800 and ISO 27001.
Awesome. So let's see here. I guess we only have a couple minutes left, so let's go to kind of formal Q&A. And one of the first questions to pop here is from John. Can you talk about cybersecurity insurance? Is it a component? Is it included in what you offer? Do you carry it? Does the client carry it? How does that all work?
That's a great question, John. So we definitely carry it because we want to limit our liability, and I recommend that all MSPs or MSSPs do, along with some other types of insurance to limit your liability. However, there are certain things that we do that are required by that type of policy so that we would actually get paid in the event that we'd have an insurance claim. We've never had to file one, but for example, we have to do background checks on all of our employees and ensure that anybody on our security team has an annual check. Our entire team had a check prior to being hired, and none of them has felonies or jail time on their records. Those are things that get written into our side of the deal. And for the client side of the deal, they still have to get their own cybersecurity insurance. Just because they're using us doesn't mean that they're going to have zero chance of anything happening. We don't include that, but what we do is as a part of that gap assessment, we say, hey, we found out that you don't have cybersecurity insurance. We've established a relationship with a local partner in the community, and this guy over here, his name happens to be Chris. He's an expert on cybersecurity insurance for MSSPs, for small businesses. We'd like to make the intro, and he's got a special package that we pre-negotiated for small businesses that would be a great fit. And by the way, by establishing that relationship with a local insurance carrier, preferably your own insurance carrier, they're a great COI, a great center of influence in the community that will help bring you business, and it'll be a two-way referral partnership. So I highly recommend taking that approach.
Now, I think what you shared, Eric, is very robust and complete. I mean, do you have a view of partnering with IT consultants or smaller MSPs who maybe don't want to bite off this whole type of opportunity themselves? I mean, do you see partnering opportunities with other people where you can work together, where they can kind of bring you in as the MSSP expert on top?
Absolutely. In fact, we've already done that with one other organization, and in that scenario, they're bringing us in to be the MSSP. We can even white label it so it looks like your own MSP's product, or you can sell it as a third-party enhancement. And we don't go after any managed services business with those clients. We have an agreement in place to protect that from happening. And in the backside, we work with their VCIO or whoever's filling that role for the client so that we help them look good, not bad. And the vCISO is working hand in hand with the MSP's VCIO to create the best possible business plan. And if they need to add X, Y, and Z to the MSP plan, we help them do that. We don't just poke holes in their offering and try to make them look bad, which, by the way, is what we found a lot of MSSPs do in the community.
Okay, awesome. And has that sort of partnering strategy fully rolled out? I mean, is that something? How would somebody get a hold of you if they wanted to explore that with you?
Feel free to share my contact info with everyone, Ted. I try to be highly available to everyone in the community. And after the last webinar I did, I had over 200 emails, so I try to go through those as quickly as possible. Sometimes it ends up happening on the weekend. but share my contact info, and I would be happy to talk to anybody about that type of approach or answer any questions that we didn't go over today.
Well, I guess just I'm just looking here at the Q&A log, and I'll just throw in a question. I mean, if for somebody who's going to go build this on their own, I think you've provided a great roadmap of all the ingredients and how an offering might look, and that's clearly half the battle. The other half of the battle is to build muscle mass and capability inside your organization. Can you talk to us about what you've done there in terms of having the right people to go execute this kind of business strategy?
Yeah, I mean, I found within my organization, I had people in other roles like network engineers or NOC admins, people who had a passion about cybersecurity, even though they were filling a different role. And through our career road mapping strategy, their manager meets with them on an annual basis, talks about where they want to go in their career. We identified a bunch of people that became part of our skunkworks team for cybersecurity when we built this out. And I bet if you have the same approach with your organizations, talk to your employees, talk to your team members, I bet you'll find some that love cybersecurity, are really interested in it. Make that investment in them, have them, get them certified, make them a certified security engineer through one of the partnerships that you develop and establish. And they're going to be able to do a lot of the work as you're getting this product off the ground. And eventually, when you have enough MRR, you can afford to hire full-time people to come in. You don't need a vCISO on your payroll day one, but you might need to establish a consulting agreement with a vCISO day one, so they can come in for 2 hours a quarter or whatever it ends up being, and bill you for that time, and you just factor that cost into your managed security package. Once you have enough MRR, you can afford to hire all these roles and bring them in-house. And I found that through our investment in company culture and career road mapping and employee success, really career success, we have a much more attractive culture than a lot of those MSPs out there, or MSSPs out there. And we even hired somebody 2 weeks ago who loved our culture so much, they turned down a job at Microsoft to be on our team.
All right, so that's there's a lot to digest here, everybody, and but I think Eric's done an excellent job of giving you kind of the both halves of the investment. You need to invest in company culture and career path and having a very interesting work for your people so that they're always engaged and growing. But then there's also a ton of really practical ingredients you need to build your own MSSP offering. Or there's opportunities to also partner. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Eric, for sharing all these insights and wisdom with our listeners today and our viewers.
Yeah, you got it. Thanks for having me on here, Ted. I hope this was valuable to everyone. And like I said, share my contact information. I have no life, so I will help everyone out as much as I can.
All right, so we're going to do that. We're going to be sharing lots of questions about getting copies of today's content. We will send everybody a link to a MP4 version of the content along with the slides. And then we'll always post a recording of the webinar also on eFolder's YouTube channel. So lots of different ways for you to share this with any of your business partners or staff. And then we will also include Eric's contact information as well. And for the eFolder team, we are one part of our point of view is we're one part of providing that defense in depth strategy for your clients, for their security, for their data, for their uptime. And we just appreciate everybody spending some time today to learn a bit more about how to take things to another level. So thank you, Eric, and thank you to everybody for tuning in. This is Ted Hulsy, Vice President of Marketing at eFolder, and this is another edition of the eFolder Partner Chat webinar series. Take care, everybody.